our special guest speaker and survivor, Doug Cross.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Jim. And thank you to the committee. You know, it's interesting, when I was asked to be the survivor speaker, I sort of envisioned a campfire, sitting around with my feet up on a log, drinking a cup of coffee, and sharing with maybe 4 or 5 people. In my wildest imagination, I never pictured this. So I want to thank you all for being here. And I also want to thank myself for being here. As a 6-year survivor of pancreatic cancer, I'm really glad. I'm really pleased to be anywhere above ground and standing here being able to talk with you. As you know, pancreatic cancer has taken quite a few people from our lives. Most recently, Sally Ride, female astronaut, Patrick Swayze, Michael Landon, Steve Jobs, Randy Pausch, who did the last lecture, Dizzy Gillespie. You know, if I stood here and read the list, I'd be reading here until next rally. So I'm going to just say a lot of people have succumbed to this disease. Now, a few weeks ago, I met with my doctor because I needed his signature on an overseas travel form. And he had just come back from a pancreatic cancer conference. And he just looked at me and shook his head, and he goes, "Doug, statistically you should be dead." And I paused for a moment, and I thought about that, and I came back with my best Monty Python imitation. And I said, "But I'm not dead yet. I'm not dead yet." And I suppose that's the title of my story, I'm Not Dead Yet. Now, that story has some amazing timely coincidences, an early diagnosis, some amazing doctors. Well, one of them not quite so amazing, I'll tell you about him later. And then some aggressive treatment. Now, my journey here probably started about 11 years ago. My mother's health was failing, so we moved my mother from California up to Oregon to a house that we bought next to us, and I became her primary caregiver. Eventually, she became a full-body lift. And one Sunday morning, I got up, and I hadn't slept very well. My back had been bothering me. So we got her up, gave her breakfast, and I spent time trying to loosen up my back. And it just wouldn't get loose. So once we got her settled, I turned to my partner, and I said, "Something's wrong with my back. I need you to take me to the ER." Now, after she recovered from the shock that I would even ask that, being a man, we never go to the ER, we went to the ER, Salem Hospital. And they put me in one of those little rooms, told me to take all my clothes off, and gave me one of those gowns that tie in the back. Now, I also need to let you know that in those days, I weighed almost 300 pounds. Whoa. And that gown didn't cover all of the important pieces. So they came in and they took my vitals, they took my blood, lots of blood, and they said, "Sit and wait, and we're going to run the tests." So we sat, and we waited, and we waited, and we sat, and we sat and waited and waited and sat. After about 3.5 hours, I thought they had forgotten about me. So I got out and I started walking up and down the hallways. Now, I don't know if I scared people or I nauseated them, but there was this 300-pound butt that was hanging out the back of my gown. And they ushered me back in the room real fast, saying the doctor's going to be here soon. Sure enough, he showed up a very short time later with a piece of paper in his hand. And he stood there and he studied the paper, and he was quiet for a while, and then suddenly he gave this sort of low whistle. Didn't pick up. And he goes, I have never seen pancreatic enzyme values as high as yours are. And I go, hey, I set the record, high five, put me up on the wall of fame, fix my back, and send me home. And I could see that he didn't catch the humor in that. He said, no, this is serious. Pancreatic enzyme values are supposed to be around 100. He says, you've come in at 4,000. And he said, the problem is, we don't know what's causing it. He said he thinks it may be a gallstone. So he said, we'll send you down there for an ultrasound of your gallbladder. So, down to the ultrasound, gallbladder, came back up again, waited and sat and waited. Finally, the doctor came back in and he goes, there's nothing wrong with your gallbladder, but we're going to take it out anyway. Everybody told us about the one that was not quite so amazing. So I said, no, doc, I can't do it. I haven't got time. I have to take care of my mother. I'm writing my doctoral dissertation, and the Seahawks are playing on TV this afternoon. So somehow they got a hold of my doctor. And I told him the same thing. I go, mother, dissertation, Seahawks. And he told me, Doug, if you don't take care of this, you won't be able to take care of those. So he convinced me. I consented, signed me up for the surgery. So we got mother in respite care. I brought in my laptop, and the Seahawks lost that afternoon. Go figure. Well, we got there Monday morning to sign in, and the doctor came in for his consultation. Says, we're ready to operate. However, we cannot operate when your pancreatic enzyme values are as high as they are. They've got to come down. So I go, okay, what do I need to do to bring them down? He says, you need to stop eating. Now, telling a 300-pound man that he has to stop eating is like cruel and unusual punishment. But I said, okay, I can handle this. 1 meal, maybe 2 meals, no problem. 4 days later, they came in and said, now we can operate. So they took out my gallbladder. And while I was under the anesthetic, they took an endoscope and put it down my throat and looked around. Came back and said, okay, everything's fine. Doctor said, all right, you're fixed, no problem. Go on your way. Patted me on my head, patted me on my butt, send me on my way. 3 months later, a coworker of mine looked at me and said, Doug, you look jaundiced. Back to my doctor, another blood test. And when I met with him, he looked at the values and he goes, Doug, I have never seen liver enzyme values as high as this is. And I go, Doc, I've heard this story already, and I don't have a gallbladder to give you anymore. And he goes, yeah, I know. So he sent me to a gastroenterologist who ran a whole bunch of tests. And then he sent me to a specialist in Portland who had an endoscope with an ultrasound on the tip so they could really see what was going on inside of me. So we went up to Portland, and that type of procedure has to be done under anesthetic. So they knocked me out. I still to this day remember waking up in the middle of that procedure, trying to pull the tube out of my mouth. So they had to give me some more anesthetic, knock me down. The doctor said I actually woke up a second time. So again, they had to increase the anesthetic. I don't remember that second time. So it took me a fair amount of time to recover in the recovery room. By the time I got one eye open, my partner was there, and the doctor was already there with a little picture. And once I got aware to be able to see things, he said, see this outline? That's your pancreas. He says, see this little 2-centimeter mass in your pancreas? And then he said those words. He said, you have got cancer. I did not expect that at all. What happened after that is my partner and I had to fly to San Francisco that weekend to celebrate her parents' 50th wedding anniversary. So we flew over the clouds, but we carried our own dark cloud with us. And to be quite honest, I don't remember anything about that particular weekend. We came back up and we met with a surgeon in Portland. And he gave me the statistics. He says pancreatic cancer has a 2 to 5% recovery rate. That's a 95 to 98% mortality rate. People die. And he said that he wanted to do a particular procedure known as a Whipple procedure. The Whipple procedure is opening up the abdomen and doing all that they can inside. He says you've got better odds. You have a 10% chance of recovery. And I said, I don't have any choice. So I said, sign me up. The doctor then goes, however, he had a 2-week vacation planned the next Monday. And he was booked entirely for surgery that entire week. He said, I can refer you to another surgeon, or we can make some sort of arrangement. I said, you're the best. Let's make the arrangements. He said, we never do surgeries on Saturday, but I'm going to sign you up for a surgery on Saturday. One of those coincidences. So, I went home that week, put my affairs in order, called my son and told him, called my 2 brothers and talked it over with them, and I talked to my mother, who was a nurse, and she knew how serious that diagnosis was. And we waited until Saturday. Saturday we went up to the hospital, got there on time, walked in the front door, got to the admitting desk, and nobody was there. We had to look around the entire first floor to find somebody. And I said, I've got a surgery scheduled this morning. And she goes, we never do surgeries on Saturday. I said, could you please check? And she came back a little bit later and said, oh, I guess we do surgeries on Saturday. So they admitted me, got me all prepped. The doctor comes in and says, Doug, we have 2 versions of this surgery. We have the 30-minute version. Now, in the 30-minute version, what we do is we open you up, we take a look around, see that we can't do anything, we sew you back up and send you home to die. So the other version takes about 9.5 hours. We open you up and we do absolutely everything we can for you. I said, I'll take the 9.5 hour version, please. And he said, we'll see. About 10.5 hours later, I wake up in the recovery room. My partner was there, and my son was there. Shortly thereafter, the doctor arrived, and he said, we got it. He said, it's the strangest thing, as they were cutting into the pancreas, they saw that the tumor was sitting right on the ducts that connects the pancreas to the liver. And because it was sitting on top of the ducts, every time the pancreas or the liver produced its enzyme, it was just like a stopped-up sink. It couldn't go anywhere, so it went back into its own organ. He said, because of that, you had the symptoms. Had that tumor been 1 millimeter any the other direction, he said, we would not have found out about it until you died. Another one of those amazing coincidences. Now the doctor said, you now have 2 tasks that you need to accomplish. The first one, because we're operating on your abdominal area, you need to get up and start walking as soon as you can. Get that strength back again. And he said, the second thing you need to do is pass gas. So the next, I got applause for passing gas. Next morning, I was up carrying 2 racks of monitors and bags and tubes and everything, and I started walking around the floor. That morning, I think I took 5 laps. That afternoon, 10 laps. I just kept on building up, building up, and building up. The doctors would come in and say, "This is amazing for you to be able to get up and moving that fast." It took me 4 days to accomplish the other task. And I have never seen such a celebration over a little toot. Doctors and nurses came in and said, "Did you do it? Did you do it? Did you?" Because of that discharge, they then were allowed to discharge me from the hospital. And we came back home, and my partner and I spent a lot of time walking around Salem just to build up my strength. Because 4 weeks later, we were on a plane flying to Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I walked across the stage to accept my PhD in psychology. Thank you. It was a very difficult walk across the stage because before they staged it, they had us standing for an hour in the setup room. And I wouldn't tell anybody that I just had surgery. Now, again, my partner and I, when we go someplace, we don't rent a car. We like to walk because it gives us the feel of what's going on in that particular area. And so we were walking around Minneapolis, sorry. Not all of Minnesota, just Minneapolis. We came across an open space. And there were some sculptures in the middle of the open space. And I found the sign on the front of this park, and it was the Cancer Survivor Park. And I go, "I am a cancer survivor." Now, I spent some time sitting in that park, just contemplating and thinking about what had happened. And I realized that I'd had my life handed back to me. And it was now my responsibility to do absolutely everything that I could with that life. I needed to fulfill a whole bunch of things. Now, I had always been the type of person that lived to work. Work was very important for me. 18, 20-hour days were very common. But I made the decision I was going to have to live to live. I was going to have to do the things that I had always put off, saying someday, because someday was now. So 2 months after we got back from Minneapolis, we flew to Hawaii. And we were spectators at the Ironman Triathlon. Something that I had wanted to do since I saw the first triathlon on ABC TV years and years ago, saying, I'm going to do that someday. But that was someday. That spring, I was sitting on my back porch with my partner, and we were trying to decide what we were going to do for our summer vacation. And I looked at her and I said, this is not going to be a vacation, this is going to be a honeymoon. Because she was my caretaker. And that August, we got married. After 15 years of living together, my partner became my wife. Now, I am a Scotsman, and I had always looked at Scotsmen that wear kilts. And I said I didn't have the courage to do that. My wife walked down the aisle in a Vera Wang. I walked down the aisle in a full-dress Douglas kilt. And what was even more special about that, my mother, who's where I get my Scottish genes, was there in the chapel. My granddaughter also was in the chapel, and as we walked by my granddaughter, I heard her say, Grandpa's wearing a dress. So I guess the Scottish genes didn't get down quite that far. But we did honeymoon. We honeymooned in Edinburgh, Scotland. And shortly after that, we went down about a few hundred miles south of Edinburgh into South Shields, England, and we participated in an archaeological dig at a 1st century Roman fort. I've loved history, I've loved archaeology, but I've never allowed myself to do it. It was an amazing experience digging in 2,000-year-old dirt. The year after that, we went to Tuscany, Italy, and we helped excavate an 11th century castle. The next year, we were on the coast of Italy, and this was a 1st century Roman villa where my wife and I both discovered some amazing artifacts. We didn't get to keep them, but we did find them. We are actually going back to that dig in about 3 weeks to see what has happened. There are lots of other things that I've done to fulfill myself since then. I presented a scholarly paper at an international conference in Toronto, Canada. Something I never would have ventured before all this happened. I have completed 3 sprint triathlons. Notice I said completed, I didn't say competed. There is a difference. I've also done so many 5Ks that I don't have any room anymore for all the t-shirts. And obviously, if you take a look at me, I am no longer 300 pounds. So, life has been good. And I guess, sort of in closing, the reason I can do all those things is because I can now do all those things. And I'm not dead yet. Now, I am a realist. I know that someday I will die. I accept that. But for today, and everybody join me with your best Monty Python. Ready? 1, 2, 3. I'm not dead yet. And that's why we are here, because we are not dead yet. So in closing, I would like to wish you health. I'd like to wish you strength. And I am a person that does remember the 1960s. So I'd like to wish you peace and love and thank you.
To prepare us for the survival